Hello, everybody. Welcome back to GPS Live for the week of January 27th, 2023. My name is Tristan Morris for GuidePoint Security, and I'm joined today not by our regular co-host, Jonathan. He's out for the day, but instead we've got a great guest co-host with us. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, my name's Curtis Brazel. I'm a managing security consultant at GuidePoint on the application security testing team. I'm happy to be here.
Great. We are happy to have you. Now, you've been on GPS Live once before, I think?
Yeah, they had me on to talk about my cybersecurity kids books.
Oh, yep, that is right. Was I on for that? I don't think I was on for that one. I think
I think you were out for that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I was out for that day. Yeah, how are the kids' books doing?
Doing well, thanks. Yeah, still trying to get rid of my inventory. I've got them here behind the blanket, just boxes that need to go out still. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been a fun few years with that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Are you thinking about writing another one in another entry to the series, or?
I don't know. The Guide Points, came to me before and said, hey, we should do something together. And so I'm kind of open to it, but I haven't really been thinking much about it.
Yeah. Well, maybe some of the stories that we'll talk about today can inspire a new entry. Excuse me. Like just last week, as we were coming into the show, I was like starting to feel a little under the weather, and then like I had this nice spike over that weekend, and still getting over it a little bit. So if I cough a little, that's why, and I apologize for it. For some reason,
No worries,
StreamYard isn't showing our names. I just realized, but I can't get it to turn it on. So guess that won't be that important. If you're joining us live on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, you can go ahead and put any comments that you've got in as we're doing the show, and we can see those on our end and respond to you. If you're joining us from the video on demand, thank you so much for coming in to watch this. We hope to catch you live next week. We're at the same time every week on Fridays. Before we actually get going, we do need to go ahead and throw this up. Any views and opinions expressed by Curtis or myself are our own and don't necessarily reflect the official views of GuidePoint Security. We say that just because we're going to be talking about stories that we found interesting this week in the news. And we, of course, as just regular people, we've got our opinions about everything that we see going on. So the things that we talk about here may not necessarily reflect exactly what GuidePoint would say, but it's just our own personal experience and our own personal knowledge coming in. So with that, you want to go ahead and get going, Curtis?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. Oh, Brady just joined, and because our names aren't showing, I don't know why I can't get him on. Brady asks, what are our names? I'm Tristan. I'm joined today by Curtis. So let's go ahead and get going with these stories. So our first story, pretty interesting, is a new proof of concept that has been released for the CryptoAPI bug that was discovered by the NSA a while back within Windows. This is a story that we found through the Hacker News. It's very recent. It was just published yesterday. But some new proof of concept exploit code has been released for the CryptoAPI bug that was patched last year in August. This bug essentially allowed someone to utilize the fact that this CryptoAPI service within Windows was using MD5 hashes to verify things, and so they just made use of MD5 collisions and were able to, excuse me, essentially conduct man-in-the-middle attacks by just cutting off communication on one end as communication was happening within something like Chrome, cut off, and then immediately insert their own certificate with its own collision for the MD5 hash, and then take over that communication. So Curtis, this might fall a little bit into your area of expertise. You got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's concerning. It doesn't just affect the browser, but one of the examples I saw was that Chrome, older versions of Chrome specifically, were vulnerable to this. So, as it relied on the Windows API, that crypto API to verify certificates were valid, in the browser for certain sites. The concern is that, Chrome would inherently trust certain sites that had an invalid certificate. So, the potential for phishing and attacks like that were potentially there.
Yeah, and it it looks like as like you said, is this something it goes beyond just a browser? It's anything that could be making any kind of authenticated communications calls um, would be vulnerable to this if it was using that crypto API service. And the thing about this though is that it was patched back in August, like we said earlier. It was publicly disclosed later in October. But the reason that this is important and that they're releasing this POC now is that there's a lot of stuff out there that is still utilizing this older version of crypto API, and it's just older software. And so the researchers that released this were from Akamai, the security company, um, and they were saying that this may warrant a patch from Microsoft to reach back and start updating and patching it on older versions of Windows, like Windows 7, that are less supported now, because it's such a huge vulnerability, and it's just still sitting around there, floating out there, being used. And when you look at stuff like organizations that are using legacy devices and legacy software, because whatever piece of software they have, that special function just hasn't been updated or hasn't been re-released, right? But it's using this crypto API stuff that leaves them vulnerable and open to attacks like this happening.
Yep. And, going back to those, older versions of operating systems, that's why on, pen tests, we're always saying things like, you need to update to newer versions because these are unsupported. They're no longer patched by the vendor, usually, Microsoft in this case. And, the risk isn't always apparent, but this is exactly why, right? There might not be security patches that go back to those older versions. That's kind of up to Microsoft. So it's important to, run with new versions of the operating system.
Yep, absolutely. So now that this POC code is out there, and the exploit code is out there, obviously, if you weren't already looking through your environment to figure out if you had anything that might be vulnerable to this is definitely a time to do that. Since now that exploit code is floating around in the wild.
Yep.
What's our next one here? We had another really interesting story. Oh, we've had kind of a good run. Let's actually check the comments really quickly. All right, just some folks waving at us. So that's good. Thanks for joining us all. But we've had a good run recently on the ransomware side of news. A couple weeks ago, one ransomware group was taken down. Last week we had another group that what was it? I forget exactly which group it was, but some security researchers released a decryptor that just worked across the group's entire ransomware set. So we've been on a good run recently with ransomware stories that leave us feeling better at the end than a ransomware storm normally would. So this one comes to us from SC Magazine. And it's the fact that the US and Europol have seized Hive ransomware servers and leak sites, which is really huge news because Hive is actually a very prolific group. So on Thursday morning, the Hive Ransomware Group's their victim negotiation portal and their leak site were both taken down and replaced with your standard kind of "this site has been seized" warning from governing agencies. So they were able to go in, infiltrate the Hive Ransomware Group, take these sites down, and this is really huge because it's not just their leak site. Right, just saying like, hey, here's the people that we've hit, which would be a win on its own, right? Not being able to name and shame the people that you have taken down removes a huge amount of incentive within the ransomware space to buckle and pay that ransom. But also taking down their victim negotiation portal means that Hive is not going to be able to actually operate their business model. They can't negotiate with their victims until they rebuild a new negotiation portal. And at that point, anyone who they hit previously, they would have to somehow go back and update all of those things, say like, well, this is where we need you to go now. We need you to go here to talk to us, which removes a huge, just going to be a huge burden for them. But yeah, there's some good news there out of the Hive stuff. Curtis, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool, right? Like, it sounds like the FBI infiltrated the group there and kind of sat dormant for a little while, is what it sounds like to me. And the cool thing is they're sitting there masquerading, as a black hat, kind of watching behind the scenes and tipping off victims along the way. It sounds like they saved a couple, pretty prominent, like hospitals, schools, and food service companies and things like that. Estimated about $130 million that they helped prevent by sliding over those decryption keys. So yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Merrick Garland, Attorney General Merrick Garland, said that they had successfully infiltrated and were stopping some of those attacks. They found 2 backend servers located in Los Angeles that the group was using to store data, and then they got a court order and seized those servers. So that's how they were able to pull control over those 2 sites. And bring that in. And this is actually a really interesting story timing wise for GuidePoint. Because just yesterday, GuidePoint Research and Intelligence Team, GRIT, released their annual ransomware report. So their look back across all of 2022, and looking at all the ransomware that occurred. And I've worked with them pretty extensively on those reports and getting them formatted and getting them out there. And Hive is a name that I became very familiar with by looking at their research. But specifically in this annual report, they documented their new ransomware group taxonomy that they've been working on, where they are looking at the length of time that groups have been around, the number of victims that they post, and how many people they attack, and their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and their maturity. And they can categorize any ransomware group that they're looking at into one of 4 categories. So you've got your big time folks like Hive and Lockbit and others that fall under like the full time category is the first one. So they've been around for a long time. They're posting lots of victims. Then right below full time, you've got rebrand groups, which would be any group that is just a rebrand of another one. They've been around for less time, but they're still operating under the old group's kind of same maturity level. They're still able to take down large targets and a lot of targets. They've just been around for less time, but you can tell through their TTPs that they're a rebrand. And then the other 2 groups that they are classifications they have are splinter groups. So people who kind of shard off of one group and start to form their own. So they've got similar TTPs, but they're around for less time. They may not have as much maturity because it's only a few of the people who are splitting off. And then ephemeral groups, the groups that just pop up, hit a bunch of targets, and then leave, and you never hear from them again. Something like Sparta last year with Spain. But as we were talking, as the GRIT team was talking, and we were kind of discussing the report being released and then the story about Hive broke, what they were saying is this puts Hive now in the spot where they are in prime time to move from full time over to rebrand. Because this is going to be a large enough impact on their operations that it may be worth it to them to just kind of say, all right, we're going to burn that, we're going to move on, and we're going to start a new group. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of groups we see crop up out of this in the future.
Yep.
Then we've got our last story here, and this one I think this one I think is really interesting for having you on the show in particular. This is one that I found earlier this week through the fact that I was searching around on Polygon looking for some recent gaming news, and I found this story that some hackers were holding the source code for League of Legends and Teamfight Tactics and anti-cheat software from Riot Games. They were holding that for ransom. They had broken in and stolen some source code. That story broke last Friday, but the interesting turn is now they sent a ransom note to Riot Games, and Riot Games has refused to pay the ransom to retrieve that source code, and so now it's actually being auctioned off. And Curtis, you and I were talking about this story just before we started, so you had some interesting thoughts on it.
Yeah, so clearly coming from the application security testing side, right? My concern is anytime that there's source code exposed like this, you have a larger attack surface, right? So there's the potential to find vulnerabilities, specifically with this League of Legends code, to the anti-cheat platform. there's the opportunity to look through the code, obviously understand what that code is doing in a way that you'd never be able to see dynamically from, the application runtime. And so what that does is allow people to see exactly, that's why you don't want antivirus and things like that leaking. Because if you can see the source code, you know exactly what it's looking for. You can tell, you can come up with ways how to bypass that detection. And so, the concern is people can create, cheats and things like that more effectively. And potentially with any software, even if this wasn't, a game utility or something like that, there's the potential to be weaponized, right? So looking for vulnerabilities in the code that might be exploited by an attacker. So I would be concerned, if I were, a user of this software, in case it were weaponized in some way that, targets clients and things like that.
Yeah. And, it's not unheard of. It was actually pretty common a few years ago for anti-cheat software released by different companies, especially around these large games that kind of become esports unto themselves, right? So League of Legends, why am I blanking? Is Counter-Strike? For some reason, my brain just is blanking on the first part of that. These games that become large esports unto themselves, and they'll release this anti-cheat software to make sure that it's fair play across the board. It wasn't unheard of a few years ago to see stories cropping up of people saying, like, I can't play this game because the antivirus on my computer is recognizing the cheat software or the anti-cheat software as a virus, because of how much access these anti-cheat programs have to various functions within the operating system to make sure that cheats aren't being applied to the game. When you look at that through the lens of this leak, right? So now there is source code out there for an extremely powerful piece of software. I mean, this is almost like if a well-known and well-trusted remote access tool had its source code leaked. This stuff has access to a lot of powerful functions on that machine and can now be exploited, like you were saying. But the other thing that we were talking about is a game that's, perpetually online, something like League of Legends, or if you want to look at other popular games like World of Warcraft from Blizzard and things like that. Those games are perpetually online, perpetually, constantly, almost in the background, depending on how their launcher works, making calls to look for new information, even if you're not playing the game actively. So if you've got the source code out there for that to say, oh, well, this is exactly how they are making those calls. They've got keys that are hard coded in or something like that. And now you can just start using that essentially as a delivery method, potentially for malware and for backdoors. That's pretty scary stuff, but it really highlights, I think, from a security perspective for organizations, the importance of having strong boundaries and barriers drawn between personal and work for your employees, right? If you have a bring your own device policy and you're allowing employees to use their own home computers for work or things like that, you have to make sure that there are strict boundaries put in place to say, if you're going to do that, you can't also be doing these things on there. And things like installing games or other software that you don't have control over could be a risky backdoor into your own organization and your own data.
Yep. And I don't know if we said, but this was a social engineering attack, it looked like. And,
oh, yeah.
So, it's always a good reminder, going back to security awareness training and things like that, because, a lot of organizations, even in 2020, 2022 in this case, probably, are still being targeted, right? So giving up source code and things like that are still happening. So that's something to be very much aware of.
Yeah. For sure. They the research group VX Underground was in communication with the threat actors who were responsible for this theft at Riot Games, and they just straight up told them, yep, this is how we got in. It was through an SMS phishing from one of the company's employees. They also, interestingly, it's interesting to me, I think they told them straight up, yeah, we had access for 36 hours before we were detected and kicked out. And the reason that's interesting to me is 36 hours is, in the grand scheme of things, like, not that long, right? Especially if you think about who's sitting at the keyboard for all 36 hours of that. They obviously were away for some time. They took some breaks, but that's still all that it took for them to get access to this highly sensitive information within Riot Games. And it kind of puts some perspective again on like how little time it actually takes a threat actor, if they can gain access to your environment, to move from phishing one employee by SMS to the crown jewels of your company, if they are skilled and know what they are doing. But yeah, they're now they've now put up an auction for this information, for the source code on a popular. I'm trying to look for the name of the site here. Okay, the article just listed as a popular hacking forum, but they're bundling the League of Legends source code and Pac-Man, which is the anti-cheat software, for $1 million. They're not going to sell it for less than $1 million, which is, I think, also interesting considering they asked Riot for 10 million as the initial ransom. But they're also, it does say they're willing to sell the Pac-Man anti-cheat by itself for 500,000. And to prove that they had it, they posted a 1,000-page PDF that contains a directory for 72.4 gigabytes of stolen source code. So that is a pretty hefty treasure that they make off with there. And it's interesting. I'm interested to watch this one and see how it develops over time, and what we're going to see happen if that source code actually does make its way out into the wild.
Yeah, and going back to what you said, Tristan, about the deep hooks and things that those anti-cheat applications have in the operating system, and the reason why they're often flagged by antivirus and things like that is because they can look like rootkits. They can look like Trojans. It makes me think that it runs with elevated writes on the machine. So that's even more concern if that gets compromised or weaponized in a way that can directly exploit it on customer machine or client machines and things like that. If it runs as system or something like that, that could be potentially troublesome.
Yep. It is also important to note that they do say that no player data or personal information was directly accessed and compromised in the attack. So if you are a player or a customer for Riot Games, like, your information's not out there immediately and accessible right now. But definitely keep your ear to the ground on the fact that that source code could leak, and you're going to have to be ready and primed to install updates really quickly as soon as Riot gets them out there, if there are any issues like that. Yep. Well, this week was a little bit lighter on stories. We kind of blazed through them, so we've got a couple minutes left here. Is there anything this week that really caught your eye, Curtis, that you want to bring up? Anything interesting for you?
Not really. I've been pretty heads down and enjoyed these 3 articles. So thanks for sending them over. And no, yeah, it's been a pretty light week, it seems like.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, then we're going to end this one a couple minutes early. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I see my old friend Ashley popped up in the comments here. Great to see you, Ashley. And actually, Arnish popped in with a question here that I'm just seeing, asking, could we comment on the ways and vectors for code leaks and also the risk involved due to global distributed remote organizations? So Curtis, being from the AppSec side of things, do you have any kind of wrap-up thoughts on vectors for code leaks and risks for global distributed remote organizations?
If I understand the question correctly, the code leaks are it's something to think about. How you're securing your code internally. I know a lot of people, they'll use Git repositories and stuff like that, and they're often not public, right? Sometimes they're hosted externally. I'm curious in this case, since they were social engineered, if that code repository was hosted internally. If there were outside vendors that might have had control or access to that code repository. I'm kind of, I'm curious. I get into the mindset of the attacker as an ex-pen tester, right? Like, okay, they social engineered somebody through phishing. They had to move internally to that repository, I'm assuming, grab the source code. Like you said, it was a pretty quick operation, pretty quick in and out. Yeah. So, I'm kind of curious what the specifics are. They pulled down the code and then they, exfiltrate that out of there. So I don't know if that answers the question. If not, feel free to expand on that. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious how that all went down, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, Arnish, if you've got some more questions or you want some more detail on that, obviously you can continue. You can drop another comment on this video. We'll be able to see that. Maybe that's an opportunity to expand on that. Maybe we could run a blog or something on that, Curtis, and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
expand on that a little bit, and then get that over to you, Arnish. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. It's been a ton of fun talking to you, Curtis, for this week.
Yeah, you too.
If you've got the time every Friday for our audience, Fridays 10:30 Pacific and 1:30 Eastern, we will be back here every week. So feel free to join us again. If you've been watching again on the video on demand, thank you so much for coming in. So thanks so much for this week, and for GuidePoint, I have been Tristan Morris.
Yep, I'm Curtis Brazel.
And we will catch you next week at the same time. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.